If you've been looking for the best Fortnite mobile settings, well then look no further, because today we're going to be going over the best iOS and Android settings for phone and tablet users. And at the end of the video, we're also going to be going over some tips and tricks for both devices, both platforms, on how you can get more FPS within Fortnite mobile. With the return of Fortnite to iOS devices in the European Union and elsewhere, depending on which method you might be using, I thought it'd be worthwhile to give an updated video on all the best settings now that things have changed so much over the last few years. Before we do that though, I do want to give you all a reminder, if you want to support me in the content, you can feel free to use code Ducky if you want to be lucky in the Fortnite item shop. And if you want to help me reach 1 million subscribers on YouTube, then we're super close in doing so, and I'd appreciate it if you consider subscribing. But we've got a lot of settings to go over, so let's get into things. All of these tabs look significantly different from how they did years ago, but at their core, they're basically the same. Starting off with the video tab, the first one here that you'll get when you open up your settings. For mobile frame rate, in my opinion, you're always going to want to use the highest frame rate option available to you, and depending on which device you're using, iPhone, iPad, or Android device, Epic Games will already go ahead and limit the amount of FPS your device can get based on the specifications of your device. And the reason my iPad is capped at 30 FPS is because it's not technically supported at the moment, but I'm sure it'll get a much higher FPS cap in the future. In order to go along with the most possible frames, I always recommend using the lowest possible graphic preset. For me, that's going to be low, and then your 3D resolution is really just up to you in terms of if you're able to use a higher 3D resolution while still getting a consistent frame rate within Fortnite, then it is definitely recommended to use as high of a 3D res as possible. For texture quality, I always go low, and then pre-download cosmetic textures, I turn it off, but you can always turn it on. It's really a personal preference thing, and it doesn't really affect performance too much. Next up, if you don't have on show FPS turned on, then you're gonna need to turn this bad boy on. This is how you know if your settings are actually working, and if the tips we discussed at the end of the video are actually affecting your overall performance and gameplay within Fortnite mobile. Next up, turn allow low power mode off, and then I have it disabled turned on for report performance stats. Moving on to the audio tab, this is probably the least important tab of them all. I just have most of the important things maxed out, like the main audio, the sound effects, and the voice chat. But what's funny is if we go down here to voice chat, I actually have it turned off. But what we can't skip is this setting right here, the visualize sound effects. This is like the main feature mobile is known for, where whenever there's a chest nearby, gunshots going off, or if there's someone nearby, it'll show all of these sound effects in a visual form, which I find to be very, very helpful. If you like voice chat, then you can keep it on, but personally, I don't use voice chat, so I have basically all of these settings turned off. And for licensed audio, I know there's a ton of emotes out there that have a bunch of different random songs, so again, I just mute this. This is probably the second most important settings tab within the Fortnite mobile app, and that is just going to be your general game settings. For region, if you don't know the server you're closer to, I always just keep mine on auto to make sure I'm getting the best ping possible. This is a rather new feature to Fortnite mobile, but it's one I actually recommend you turn off just today alone. There's a few gunfights in which I almost died because I had this auto run lock feature turned on, but an auto run feature I keep on is the double tap to auto run. Just double tap your joystick and you'll be auto running. This is a personal preference, but I like toggling my buttons so that way I can just tap it and we're sprinting rather than having to tap and hold the button in order for my character to sprint. Same thing with auto open doors. Being able to sprint through these bad boys is super helpful. Similar to that of the auto run lock, for the mantle activation, I prefer to have it on hold jump because there's some situations where just walking forward will mantle you when you don't want it to. And same thing for the hurl activation, I have mine on press jump. Now I usually don't just recommend you blindly copy down settings, but for the combat it's easy if you do, because after years of Fortnite, this is what I found works best. For the auto pick up weapons, this has been a really clutch feature recently, and you can go ahead and actually configure which slots you want these weapons to be picked up in, meaning if you usually put your shotgun in your second slot, you can have it so that your second loadout slot is going to be your shotgun. This can often save a ton of time and intense fights in situations where you don't want to be worrying about picking loot up off the ground. For building, same exact thing. After years of playing, these are the best building settings I have found work for a more competitive playstyle. A rather new setting is the ability to disable pre-edits. I'm not sure I know any pro player, competitive player that actually uses pre-edits to their advantage, so I always disable them, which makes it less clunky in fights. But if you are someone who edits with touch, obviously you're going to want to keep this setting on, but I've been editing with my crosshair for so long now that I can't remember the last time I edited with touch. If you're someone who has a smaller phone screen, then this touch interaction mode could actually be rather beneficial because it'll give you large icons over the loot on the ground, so that way it's easier to see what you're picking up. But for me, with a big old iPad screen, I don't actually need this setting turned on. And even though my FOV is already rather insane on an iPad, I do go ahead and put the minimum FOV all the way to a max of 75, and same thing with the max FOV, just making sure you're always having the best field field of view possible to see whatever's around you. Now, moving over to the game UI, this is pretty subject to personal preference. Personally, I just keep everything at the stock default. And literally for HUD options, I have like everything turned on. Quest progress is actually something I might consider turning off because sometimes it'll get in the way of my gameplay. But everything else you can keep on. And again, it's just personal preference. And speaking of personal preference, the touch and motion settings are incredibly personalized to each user and each device. For me, when I'm playing on a phone, I typically need to use a sensitivity between 25 and 30%. But when I'm on a tablet, if I use that sensitivity, it's just all over the place. But I would usually recommend a lower sensitivity to start out with. And if you find yourself not being able to turn fast enough, then just slowly increase it match by match or day by day until you reach a sensitivity where you feel like it works fine for your needs. I'm someone who prefers to have a really slow, the touch targeting and touch scope sensitivity basically refer to the sensitivity when you're ADS within your weapon. So for me, if I ADS, my sensitivity will be 37% of that of my main touch sensitivity. And doing the math, that basically means I have like a 9% sensitivity when I'm ADS through my guns. And same thing with my touch scope sensitivity. It just slows things down drastically, and I feel like I'm able to hit a few of my shots a little bit better. For touch building and editing sensitivity, I keep these around 140. It makes me build and edit a little bit faster without having to move my finger as much. And for look acceleration strength, again, this is another huge personal preference. I like to keep mine right around between 80 and 90%. But again, all of these are personal preferences, but I do think these are relatively good baselines if you wanted to copy them and try them out for yourself. Now, personally, I don't use gyro, and I don't know a lot of people who do in the first place. And I'm sure there's better tutorials or guides out there for gyro settings. But honestly, if I were you, I would just try to avoid using gyro at all costs. And as far as settings go, that is basically it. The other two are going to be for controller and controller mapping, which there is, as you can see, literally so much customization here for controller player. You can go in here and map out every single button, everything there is to help customize your controller experience on mobile. And so with those best in-game settings out of the way, I want to go ahead and spend a few minutes talking about some general tips and tricks you can apply to your gameplay to hopefully squeeze out the most performance out of your device possible. Now, for iOS and Android, you might think things would probably differ, but it's actually more or less the same. Most of it comes down to what device you're actually using and what sort of software you currently have running or running in the background that might be making your device run worse. For iOS users, there's not much you can really do other than just closing out all the apps and making sure you're not screen recording. If you want the maximum FPS possible, then literally just having Fortnite open and that's it is the best way to go. Another tip for both iOS and Android is making sure you lower your screen brightness to around 50% or less. Anything higher will cause your device to overheat faster, making your device thermal throttle, or basically it gets so hot to the point where it can't perform optimally and your device has to run slower in order to cool itself down. And so if you have a phone or tablet case on your device, then taking these off when playing could keep your device a little bit cooler, which again helps it perform at its maximum potential. But if you really want to push things to the max with Fortnite Mobile and extract as much potential as possible from your device, then getting some sort of phone or tablet or a laptop cooler is going to be the best way to ensure that you're getting the max frame rate possible. The quickest way over the last few years of playing Fortnite Mobile on Android devices in particular, I've noticed the one thing that really starts to degrade the performance of Fortnite Mobile is going to be my device overheating. As soon as it starts to get somewhat hot, Fortnite Mobile just instantly caps the frame rate to 60 or 45 or 30 in some instances. And so if you're really serious about your Fortnite Mobile performance, either on a phone or tablet, then investing in a phone cooler could definitely be worth it. And I'll leave some link down below in the description that I've heard great reviews from. Unfortunately, outside of that, there's not any really solid tips or methods that we can use in 2024 to get more FPS. There used to be things like the 60 FPS trick back in the day where you could do a certain combination of actions and then you'd actually get 60 FPS unlocked in your game regardless of the device you had. And so it really just comes down to optimizing your device in terms of software and making sure you don't have a bunch of apps running in the back or you're screen recording or your brightness isn't too bright. And as far as hardware goes, ensuring you can cool your device down by either taking off any phone cases or playing on a bed or some sort of flat surface where your device isn't really able to cool itself off. Those are going to be the free ways to get better performance, where the other option is going to be investing in some sort of phone or tablet cooler that will really help you see some crazy performance games long term. I hope you guys did enjoy today's video, and if you learned something, a like would be greatly appreciated. Let me know down below in the comment section if there's any settings that you rock that are different from me, or if there's any tips or tricks that you've picked up over the years of how to get more FPS within Fortnite Mobile. But with all that being said, it's been DuckyTheGamer. Thanks for watching today's video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Deuces!